Hello there, welcome back. This is Percent of Change, Chapter 6, Section 4. And this is really easy. It's probably going to seem more complicated than it really is. If you'll break it down exactly like I do, I think you'll find you can do really well on this. Calculators are extremely helpful for this, so hopefully you have one at home, and hopefully you're watching these videos carefully with detail to catch what's happening in here, and you're going to see that these two things are basically the same thing we're finding here. A percent of change is a ratio that compares, all right, it's comparing the change to the original amount, the change in a quantity to an original amount. This might say if you have an investment of money and you want to know how much money it's made, you compare it to how much money you invested originally, and that gives you a percent that it changed to tell you how well the investment did. And here's the equation. The percent of change is found by taking the amount of change and dividing it by the original amount. It's really simple to do, really. And then the percent of error is basically the same thing. This would be the type of thing where if you make a guess um, that something is going to happen at a certain time, and you miss it by, you go over like a minute or you go under it a minute, you can calculate what was the percent of error, and you do that by measuring the difference between the estimate. Okay, here it says the percent of error is a measure of the difference between the estimate or prediction and the actual value. All right, and that'll make more sense when we look at the context of some questions. But I want to add a couple of notes on your page on the front side here underneath I'm going to try to explain it as simple as I can. To find the percent of change, all right, you need to find two things. All right, the first thing that you need to find is the amount of change. You have to know what that is. And usually we subtract to find that because they would give you an original, they would give you what it was after it changed, and you would subtract those things. So usually you subtract to find that. And then the other thing that you need is the original amount. That's a G right there, original amount. And when you have those two things, what you do to find the percent of change, I'll just write it like that, percent of change is equal to the change, which you found here, divided by the original, and then you multiply all that times 100. And that will give you the percent of change of whatever it is, whatever the topic is that we're talking about. This can be applied to so many things in the world around us. It's actually really valuable, especially when it comes to money and things like that. Now, the other thing in this chapter, very similar to that, is how to find the percent of an error. So again, this is how much mistake did you make, maybe in a guesstimate of something. Let's say that you're guessing the number of gumballs in a big giant jar, and you miss it by, say, 10 gumballs. Well, we can figure out what percent of error that you had compared to the original there. And here's what you need. There's two pieces of information. Just like above, you need to know the amount of error. How much did you miss that guess by? Again, usually you subtract to find that. If you know the actual and the error, you subtract. Or if you know the actual and the guess, and then you also need to know the actual value, like how many gumballs are actually in the actual value is what that's supposed to say, how many gumballs were in the original jar. And so to find the percent of error, I'll just say percent E. Here's what you do. That's equal to the error. All right, how much did you miss it by? The error divided by the actual, and then that's multiplied times 100. Okay, and that's exactly what they're telling you up here. To find the percent of error, that's what they did up here. Okay, so let's look at the backside and work through and just see how easy these really are. If you'll just find those two pieces of information, it's really pretty simple. So here we go. We're going to round these to the nearest tenth, and they're asking us to find in number one the percent of change. All right, and they also want you to say, was that an increase or a decrease? Okay, we'll talk about that when it gets to it here. So number one here says it went from 400 to 32. So whatever this was, maybe it's a sale price. Okay, so it was 400, now it's 32. So the first thing that we want to know is how much did this change? Okay, and write this down just like that. You want to figure that out first. How much did this thing change? Well, you're going to subtract 440 minus 32. And that equals 8. So the change was 8. Now, the second thing that you want to know is what was the original amount? In other words, what was this before it changed? Was it 40 or was it 32? It went from 40 to 32. So the original was 40, okay, because it changed to 32. So to find the percent of change in number 1, all right, if you look back in your notes, the percent of change is the change divided by the original times 100. All right, the change was 8, the original was 40, and you multiply that times 100. Now you grab your calculator and you put it in 8 divide 40 times 100. And that should come out to be 20, and it's 20%. Now it says, was this an increase or a decrease? Well, look back at the original problem. If it went from 40 to 30, did that go up or down? It went down. So this is 20% decrease. So to answer that, and you do need to say if it's an increase or decrease, you look back at the original like that. And there you have it. There's number 1. It's that simple. Now I think what I'll do for number 2 is change colors just so you can keep them separate here. We're continuing to find the percent of change. And number 2 says this went from 56 to 63. Okay, so the first thing you always have to find is the change. The change, it went from 56 to 63, so I'm going to go 63 minus 56. I subtract that and I get 7. All right, so this went up 7. And then the original, what was the original amount before the change? The original amount, it went from 56 to 63, so the original amount was 56. Okay, so to find the percent of change, you take the change, which was 7, divide it by the original, and multiply it times 100. It's the same formula, just again, like we said, on the front side, percent of change is change divided by original times 100. So the change was 7, the original was 56. Put all that in your calculator. 7 divide 56 times 100. This one comes out to be 12.5%. And I left there's a decimal in there. 12.5%. Make sure you multiply that 100 in there. And that's an increase because it went from 56, it went up to 63. So it's 12.5% increase. So there you have 2 examples. Let's wrap up number 3 and then I'll do one more video to explain percent of error. Do those examples. Again, this just gets easier and easier as we go. On Saturday, Smoothie Central made $1,300 in sales. Sunday, they made $900 in sales. What was the percent of change from Saturday to Sunday? And was it an increase or decrease? Okay, let's start with this. To find the percent of change, you must find the change. How much did this change? Well, you have to subtract 1,300 minus 900. This changed 400. All right, that's easy enough. What was the original amount? The original amount before it changed was 1,300. Saturday comes before Sunday. In this case, it was Saturday, comparing Saturday to the next day. So it's 1,300. So to find the percent of change, you take the change. The change was 400. Divide it by the original amount. And multiply that times 100. All right, 400 divided by 1,300. Multiply that times 100. You're going to get a nice long, I think it comes out to be, it'll probably look like this on your calculator, 3076 6, 9, dot, dot, dot. There's a whole bunch more numbers. Well, let's just go ahead and round it off to that place value right there, to the tenths place, and let's just call it 30.8%. Now, is this an increase or a decrease? It went from 1300 to 900. This is a decrease. Okay, so it's 30.8 decrease, and that would be expected because Saturday is typically going to be a lot busier at a yogurt place probably than a Sunday. Okay, let's stop this video. I'll do one more for percent of error. It should be a short one, and then we'll be done.